Jen, Hope, I just sent you guys a quick email, by the way. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to MCDA's Masterclass Series. Apologize for the late start this morning. This morning we have Laura Graziano, who is going to provide us with an amazing class on land use and a number of other issues. I apologize, I'm a little distracted this morning. Jen, would you mind taking over real quick for me, please?
Sure. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Maine Community Development Association, that's the group that is hosting this workshop series. MCDA's purpose is to provide forums and increase awareness and foster communication relating to community development issues and concerns, and provide education and training through workshops. So that's what we're doing here. And something I realized the other day is that when I say, oh, hey, you can join the Maine Community Development Association, it's not a problem, go to MCDA.org. I don't necessarily say it's a statewide organization, so anyone is free to join. You do not have to work for a regional planning organization. We have folks who come under a number of different categories. So if you're at all interested and you're not already a member, please let me know. And I think that we will just go ahead and turn it over to Laura. Oh, and just as I'm going to be sneaking out at 9 o'clock because I have another meeting that I could not get out of. So I'm sorry, Laura, I'll be leaving early.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Please let me know if you need me to speak up or anything. It's a little loud outside my office this morning with some lawn maintenance going on. But I am just going to get right into it with sharing my slides, if you'll give me a moment. Let's see. How is that? Can we see?
Looks good. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, great. Thank you. So to kick it off, my name is Laura Graziano. I'm a community resilience planner with Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission. And I'm going to be talking a bit about our housing needs assessment and the data analyses that we used and the next steps that we're taking from our housing needs assessment here in Mid-Coast Maine in Lincoln County. So this is just real quick here, some of the things I'll be going through today, a little bit of background of the process and who we are at LCRPC, then going into our housing needs assessment, talking about the mapping of potential future growth areas. Then I'll be talking a little bit about the strategies and action items that came out of our housing needs assessment. And then I'll be jumping into talking a bit about our prioritized inventory of potential housing development sites. So to start off about Lincoln County's background, Lincoln County is located in Mid-Coast, Maine. We have 18 municipalities and one island community that you can see kind of hanging off in orange here. That's Monhegan Island, and as well as 2 unorganized territories. Lincoln County ranks 13 in population out of the 16 Maine counties with just over 36,000 residents. And Lincoln County's towns populations range from 62 year-round residents on that Monhegan Island to our largest community of Waldoboro with just over 5,000 residents. And a majority of the municipalities in Lincoln County have between 1,000 and 3,000 residents. Lincoln County is often referred to as the oldest county in the oldest state. We have a median age of 51.2 years of age. So with that, it's really important for older adults to have opportunities to age in place and for our younger residents to have affordable options to keep living in their communities to keep a strong workforce. So at our office here and at LCRPC, we serve as the region's regional planning organization, but we're a bit unique in that we're also a department of county government. We're the only county in Maine that has a planning department within the county government. So our regional planning organization has a board of directors that includes representatives from each municipality, as well as we report to the county commissioners. So in 2021, we went under a robust 5-year strategic planning process with those board of directors. And we identified from highest to lowest our 6 strategic priorities, with housing being the top priority. And then you can see here our other priorities include broadband, sustainable economic and community development, transportation, intergenerational community building, and environmental sustainability. So to take action on that top priority of housing, in the fall of 2022, we contracted with Camoin Associates to undergo a county-wide housing study. This housing needs assessment, which was released in May of 2023, outlines county-wide demographics and economic profiles, a housing inventory and market trends, looks at the housing needs assessment throughout the county as well as in the individual municipalities. It looks at future growth opportunities throughout the county and again in the individual municipalities. And it provided us with a strategy framework of 21 different strategies that the county can take as well as municipalities can take. This project was funded through our strategic priority budget through the county. So for this process, I'm going to jump into talking about our future growth opportunities. From the data that we collected and analyzed in the housing needs assessment, Camoin projected that the county requires roughly 1,048 new rental units or residential units to become available over the coming decade to accommodate the anticipated overall rise in total households while also replacing those older units due for removal. So the market will accommodate for the development of those higher end properties for those able to finance their construction of those market rate units. But beyond production of new market rate housing, a substantial portion of the community will be in search of significant additions to affordable older adult and workforce housing stock. So the future growth opportunities section of the housing study focused on the potential distribution of the need for those older adult and workforce housing units. This chart here shows the potential distribution of those different housing unit types throughout the county. The methodology notes on the right-hand side for these distributions describes how the greater density development potentials are focused in Lincoln County towns that have sewer and water infrastructure. These communities with sewer and water utilities include Boothbay and Boothbay Harbor, Damariscotta, parts of Newcastle, Wiscasset, and Waldoboro. So these are the areas that have potential for those multi-family housing units since they can be supported by the infrastructure. And that's represented here in these numbers, as you can see under the multifamily housing column. Boothbay Harbor, and Boothbay have numbers of looking at potentials of 40, 53 multifamily housing units, Damariscotta having 40, Newcastle 31, Waldoboro 85, and Wiscasset 61. While the other communities without those infrastructures weren't identified as having those multifamily housing units and more leaning towards those single family and attached single or accessory dwelling as the potential distribution of those affordable housing units. So when we're looking at those potential future growth areas, especially for those larger developments, we wanted to be able to visualize and look at the areas where it most makes sense. So to further look into the distribution of these units, we looked at the potential future growth opportunities throughout the county. These areas were identified by looking at areas within 1 mile of public water and sewer utilities, looking at growth areas defined in town comprehensive plans, as well as town zoning and land use. Future growth in Lincoln County is likely to occur most heavily in those areas with access to infrastructure. Like I mentioned, those communities of Boothbay, Boothbay Harbor, Damariscotta, parts of Newcastle, Wiscasset, and Waldoboro have the most existing infrastructure capacity to support new housing units, which are displayed here in those 1 mile buffers. So those are, the areas that are highlighted here on the map in those greens and yellows, which really take up a small portion of the county overall. So when we're thinking about the density of the distribution of those housing units, it is, really in those areas that have those utilities. So this 1 mile buffer is a bit generous given the cost of expanding utilities, but we want to ensure that we are capturing a variety of options throughout the county. While areas of Lincoln County without municipal sewer and water will be unable to build as densely, opportunities will still exist for housing production. So I just wanted to reiterate, while the county is funding and supporting this project of identifying the potential sites for development and looking at potential distributions through our housing needs assessment, the county is not mandating that these sites must be used for affordable housing, rather using this as a project as a way to start the conversation with developers and property owners about the possibility for housing now or in the future. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the mapping of the future growth areas for the utility district process. For the utility district outreach process, we began with assessing public sewer and water utility districts within Lincoln County. There are 5 utility districts serving 6 Lincoln County towns year-round, which I listed in the previous slide. We did not include the seasonal utility districts or any smaller private or low capacity utility districts in this assessment, since they don't have the capacity to look at a larger increase in units served. So as part of this analysis, sewer and water utility districts were contacted to determine if their facilities could handle the potential increased levels of services from the proposed housing units. So those were the proposed numbers that were listed in that large chart a couple slides earlier. There were no immediate concerns identified from any of the districts as we did that outreach. Once it had been confirmed that the potential growth could be handled, we began the mapping process. So of the 5 utility districts, only 1 had publicly available data of the service areas. So to gather the remaining data of the districts, we continued that outreach to access their sewer and water GIS data lines, or in a majority of the cases for our public utility districts, we requested to borrow their paper maps so that we could create those sewer and water lines into GIS data for our own purposes for this project. So we used that process to create those 1-mile buffers that we can see here on the right-hand side. So once the data was created and collected for each of the utility district, we created those 1-mile buffers of the potential future growth areas so that potential housing developers that would be interested in extending sewer and water to future housing sites. Although the 1-mile buffer, like I mentioned earlier, is generous, we wanted these maps to serve over the next decade, so this could allow for any potential future growth moving forward. So the areas within 1 mile of the utility buffers were then examined by looking at the town's most recent comprehensive plan future land use designated districts, as well as their zoning and land use districts. A majority of Lincoln County towns don't have land use or zoning GIS data already created or accessible. So we use this as an opportunity to not only analyze the zoning and land use within these buffer areas, but also to create this data for every Lincoln County town. Once the zoning and land use data was created by our staff here, we analyzed each town's most recent comprehensive plan future land use chapter to create another GIS layer that shows each town's designated future land use area. For this process, we used the zoning data as a guide to create the future land use areas. And for the purpose of this project, we only analyzed the areas that are within the 1 mile buffer of utilities, but we also included a list of towns that have growth areas that are not within that 1 mile buffer in the final countywide map product. The designated areas in the final map product are listed here under the comprehensive plan districts, which include the growth, limited growth, rural, shoreland zoning, conservation, and preservation. The shoreland zoning, conservation, and preservation districts are only combined for the purpose in this map to represent areas that really cannot contain any growth and are to be protected moving forward. Then while we have the growth are the areas that are identified in town's comprehensive plans per the growth management law as areas that are suitable for growth moving forward. And then limited growth areas being those areas that do not define unrestricted growth, and then rural areas that are meant to preserve the town's character and not include any growth. So for the final future growth map areas, growth area maps, we created one for each of the town areas that have those utility districts. So here we have Newcastle and Demarcata's map. And the final map product includes the details that I outlined previously, including information on the utility districts, lists of towns with designated future growth areas that are not within the 1 mile public water and sewer, descriptions of the comprehensive plan districts, or the designated areas from the comprehensive plan future land use chapter, as well as the dates of the town's most recent comprehensive plan update. And these are used to help guide, the process of the future growth areas. And as towns update their comprehensive plans, these growth areas may shift, but these were, used as the process as at the date that this was completed in March of 2023. So towards the end of our housing needs assessment process, we have the summary of our strategies and action items. So this is what I mentioned earlier, where we have the 21 strategies and recommendations of actions that we, the county, can take, as well as individual municipalities. And we have here, you see on the right-hand side, the impact on housing that'll take from low, medium to high, the level of administrative effort, again, from low, medium to high, and then the time frame from 0 to 1 years, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and then some of these strategies will be ongoing. So for this next steps process, we wanted to identify what would be the best step for us as the regional planning organization to take. And we decided to take action on strategy item 4A, which is compile a prioritized inventory of potential housing development sites. And this is within strategy 4, which is looking at the prioritized sites and advancing shovel readiness. So here's a bit more information around that strategy 4A. So to work through this inventory process, we again engaged with Camoin Associates to work through creating this inventory of potential housing development sites throughout the county. So a prioritized inventory of sites is a critical foundation step towards allocating these limited public resources to the most impactful projects and recruiting private developer interest and investment in projects. So it kind of says here that our staff can lead the inventory with support from municipal staff. So this project was really a group effort that we conducted with our staff, Camoin Associates, and a lot of outreach to our municipalities, private property owners, which I'll talk about a bit more throughout this process. So our first steps were tackling the GIS analysis. Again, like I mentioned earlier, with our potential housing distribution maps that we conducted for the housing needs assessment, we spent a lot of time creating that zoning data and future growth area data that really came into play for this prioritized site inventory process. And like I mentioned, for that process, we really were only looking at those areas within the 1 mile buffer. And for the site inventory process, we were looking at this countywide. So we kind of took a step back again, and we were looking at creating a lot of these GIS layers throughout the whole county. And then a lot of these data layers also already exist at the state and national level. So we kind of partnered, like I said, with Camoin. So our office here kind of collected all the data and put it all together to send off to Camoin for them to run the full GIS analysis of identifying those sites throughout the county. So we wanted to look at criteria that would identify sites that, had no wetlands on the sites, that had low slope, that were within those, closer to the key services of schools, hospitals, and utilities, within zoning that made sense for larger housing development. So that's kind of the criteria that you see here for elevation, contours, wetlands, conservation lands, environmentally sensitive areas, floodplain areas, land use, growth areas, parcel data, transportation networks, etc. And then the last bullet there saying find a data gaps and filling them is kind of what I mentioned that our staff spent a lot of time doing, is creating those zoning and land use data sets for almost all of the municipalities in Lincoln County for the municipalities that do have zoning and land use within their town ordinances. We also ran into 2 of our communities not having already created at the state level parcel data. So we did have to take a couple steps back and create parcel GIS data for 2 of our communities so that we would be able to then identify at the parcel level some potential housing sites for development for this process. So you can see here on the right-hand side, this is just kind of a scratchy GIS screenshot from my ArcMap of some of the municipalities that do have zoning. So you could see kind of the municipalities that are have the parcel lines that are not colored in. Those are our communities in Lincoln County that do not have zoning or land use. Then the municipalities that are colored in our greens and blues and purples here are the Lincoln County communities that have land use and zoning. So once Camoin completed the GIS analysis, our staff here at Lincoln County completed a build-out analysis for each of the identified properties. Once the GIS analysis was completed, we had 90 identified properties throughout the entire county, and we had at least 1 property identified within each municipality. So we use this opportunity to just start narrowing down which properties make the most sense to keep in our final output of the site inventory, and making sure that the properties identified in the GIS analysis actually do make sense from a logistics point of view as we started to look at a little more in depth of things like the acreage versus the dry acreage, the density allowed per town zoning ordinance, the actual distance to sewer and water, and the potential for the hookups there, and any other details that might be noted from either municipalities or property owners outreach, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide. So for the owner outreach process, again, this was kind of happening all concurrently, and while Camoin was conducting the GIS analysis, our staff at Lincoln County was reaching out to all of our municipal leaders throughout Lincoln County to see if there were any identified properties within municipalities that were owned by Lincoln County municipalities that could be used for potential affordable housing in the future. So a couple of the properties that are in the final affordable housing site inventory document are municipally owned. And then as Lincoln County was working on the build-out analysis, Camoin was conducting that outreach to the individual private property owners that were identified throughout the GIS analysis process. So Camoin was conducting that to kind of gauge the property owner's interest in potentially selling to developers for affordable housing, but mainly just to make sure that, they are comfortable with including their property in this future document. So a lot of the property owners that Camoin was able to get in touch with said that they are comfortable with potentially in the future selling their properties for affordable housing. Because like I said, a lot of these properties that were identified are vacant lots that don't already have any units created on them. So they are, lots that kind of have been sitting in families for, many years. So we included in the final document these properties that are confirmed that the property owners would be willing to sell in the future. And yeah, that was the owner outreach process. And you can kind of see on the right-hand side here, this is the prioritized site inventory for affordable housing development property profiles cover, which we'll send a link in the chat in a little bit of the final document so you can poke through it. But here is what the final product looks like of a couple examples of some of the sheets. So we have, I think in the final product, around 30 to 40 sites that are identified throughout the county. And like I mentioned, there's at least 1 within each community in Lincoln County. And each profile in this inventory includes parcel details such as the acreage, the zoning, the access to utilities, as well as the development build-out potential. In addition to a picture of the parcel, each profile includes an image or two to illustrate what the potential development would look like based on other affordable housing projects throughout Maine. So that's those pictures you kind of see of those houses on the property profiles. Those are other projects that have been done throughout the state, since we wanted to kind of give a feel of, something that's a bit homegrown. So the goal of this inventory is to provide a catalog for developers, funders, or other entities that are interested in creating or supporting affordable housing development in Lincoln County to reference when choosing a parcel to purchase or municipality to engage in discussion with. We plan for this to be a living document where we can add to or remove any properties as new opportunities arise or properties are sold, or we hear back from property owners that, hey, we're not interested in having our property in this document anymore. Could you please remove it? That's totally fine. And that's kind of the goal with this, is for us to be able to continue to add and remove to this as we see fit. So we have the template all laid out for this, that we're ready to continue adding and removing to this process. And we have already been able to utilize this as we've been, meeting with our municipalities about some potential affordable housing projects. And we hope to continue to, use this and push this as we continue our affordable housing work at our office here and throughout the county. And that is all I have for my presentation portion, but I'm happy to start having a discussion and answer any questions. And for now, I will stop sharing unless anybody will like me to go back to some slides.
So you might have mentioned it before, Laura, but how long did this process take?
Yeah. So we, like I mentioned, the housing needs assessment wrapped up in 2023 in May, and then we began the site inventory process in 2024 fall, and then we just wrapped it up this past winter, I believe. So it was about a year that it took, the site inventory process.
And I guess I have another follow-up question on that. It's all posted and published and all that?
Yeah.
Has anyone like looked at it, and has it been used at all so far?
Yeah, I mean, we've been using it in our discussions and meetings that we've been having, as we've been having like housing meetings with municipalities or some nonprofits in the area, and using this kind of as a guide for discussions as we've been talking about potential properties. So it's definitely been useful. We haven't had like an aha moment of, sitting down, since we typically don't sit down with like developers, since our office really isn't in the development world. The county isn't looking to be a developer. We're kind of using this as a guide to be kind of that, planning organization, the middleman, hand it off. We're kind of here to be a resource. So that was kind of the goal there. But definitely it has been used in a lot of conversations, and I'd say kind of more in that vein.
For whatever reason, my camera isn't working, but I'm curious about the outreach to municipalities, how they received the idea of affordable housing. Did you run into a lot of NIMBYism sort of stuff, or, especially with it, if it's town-owned foreclosed properties? I'm in Washington County, and municipalities here are starting to list with real estate agents. As opposed to considering affordable housing. So I'm kind of wondering how that went with you in the municipality.
Yeah. We're pretty fortunate. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we have our board of directors, which are a lot of the municipal leaders, our planning board, select board members at the municipalities. So as we were doing that outreach, it's a lot of the individuals that we already have relationships with, and they were already aware that we're going through this, process from the housing needs assessment process where we did a lot of outreach to them. So as we started reaching out about more the specific site inventory process, some of our municipalities were, very open arms looking to try to help to find properties. We did have a couple of our more rural municipalities that kind of said, hey, this doesn't make a lot of sense for us. The properties that we do have, it's not going to work. We don't have utilities. We're a smaller community. Some of the communities, they have 2-acre lot minimums, so it just doesn't make the most sense for them to be focused for affordable housing. So I wouldn't say it was too much NIMBYism pushback. It was more so kind of covered as like them trying to say like it just doesn't make sense for those properties that they have, but they're not against affordable housing coming to their communities. Just more like thinking about the logistics of it.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm having issues figuring out where to talk. So I have a quick question. For the communities that don't have access to GIS or a regional planning commission that has GIS, do you have recommended software? Sorry if there's feedback that they can use.
Yeah. Well, for communities that don't have, like the paid GIS systems, there is always a free GIS system called QGIS. But that's, another layer of having a staff member that kind of has that time to dig into it. But it doesn't take, too much, since a lot of the data sets are publicly available to dive into, and you're just able to upload them right to this software. So that is in the sheet that our team here will be sending out afterwards. I shared a bunch of links to the data sets that we use for the GIS analysis process. And they're all just ready to be downloaded. And yeah, QGIS is really a go-to for a free GIS software that you can really run any analysis on. That's super helpful. But other than that, I'd say a lot of the state map viewers are very helpful for kind of getting that like planning purpose gauge. And yeah, I see Jim has his hand up. You might have some input or a question.
No, I mean, I'm very impressed with your presentation and the process. There were a couple of little GIS details I was curious about. One was I didn't note, are you able to use building footprints to get a sense of where you've got vacant areas on developed land? So there's a house on the property, but it's 20 acres. Did you look at that? And the other question, these parcels that you've identified, are they all municipally owned, or are there some private ones you worked out with owners that are open to selling them? How did you come up with that?
Yeah, for building footprint, we didn't use it for this process. Camoin ran the GIS analysis, so I'm not sure if they threw building footprint in there. I know that the Microsoft one is available, but I know that they, after they identified the 90 properties, I think they might have went and just kind of individually looked at the properties to see if there were any housing units on them. A couple of them did for like especially the larger properties that were around like 30 acres. Some of those properties might have had one building on them. But yeah, that was kind of for like the building footprint side. And then for your other question, the majority of the properties are private property owners in the site inventory. So they are privately owned. And that's when Camoin conducted that outreach to the private property owners. And so the properties that are included in there, Camoin was able to get in touch with the property owners to confirm, hey, would you be interested in selling your property for affordable housing in the future? Lincoln County is putting together this document to use for outreach. Would you be comfortable in having the property in there? And so the properties that are included, the property owners either said yes, or where they were unable to get in touch with, so they're in there, and then if we ever hear back, we'll pull it out. But there are just a couple municipal owned properties that are in the final product. It isn't mostly municipal. I'd say it's mostly private.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Laura. Do you have any idea on what this project costs? And when I say like the project, the entirety of the project from the housing and the needs assessment all the way through the final product.
Yeah, I should have wrote that down. I believe our housing needs assessment was around, I don't want to misspeak.
I'm not going to hold you to anything.
Yeah.
So
I know I have it on my computer, so I can poke while we see if there are any other questions. If not, I
Okay,
can
thank you.
definitely send that afterwards.
Sorry, I keep going in and out. I don't know if I have any questions like right this moment. I just wanted to say that as I keep going back through your slides, I cannot wait to delve into all of this information you gave us and see how that translates to my community, for example. So I had to get that out while I'm going back through. Sorry. Do we have? Sorry, Hope. Can you take over?
Yes. I was just gonna say, like, this is so monumentally helpful for any regional offices or any municipalities that would want to do the same kind of assessment and try to replicate this. And I thank you so much for having all of this readily available. It looks like we have one more question. Go ahead, Peter.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, no, I just do have one question about state law and LD 2003 and all of the state laws coming down. Because like
Mhm.
so I saw in like your methodology section talked about how you don't include like any potential density bonuses or changes for 2003 in your assessment. And I was just curious why that was.
We didn't include it because the adoption of LD 2003 wasn't completed at the time of the housing needs assessment or at the time of this. So a lot of our municipalities didn't fully adopt LD 2003 yet. So we didn't want to guesstimate on the potential build out based on just the state law LD 2003, just in case the potential of any municipalities, being adjusting, not, directly based on that. So that is something moving forward that we will be doing for the future sites that we add is, referencing that. But yeah,
All right,
it was
thank
just
you
the
very
timing.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense, makes perfect sense.
I will say my coworker just greatly sent over the cost for our housing needs assessment was just under $40,000. So if that's helpful there. And then I know that the site assessment was less than that, which I will share with the team here to send out in the follow-up so that everyone can have the total amount there.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Laura.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. So unless there are any burning questions that we have left, I'd say thank you so much for coming to the MCDA Masterclass series today. Be on the lookout. Our next, the next iteration of the series is on the 29th, Wednesday, the 29th of October, and it will be Finding the Developer. how to connect with the developer RFP process, working with a developer, and advocating for your vision. So we look forward to having you at the next one. Be on the lookout for any of the documents or the slides. If you haven't already downloaded them from the chat, they will be available later. I hope that you will have a wonderful day and a wonderful next couple of weeks, and that you enjoy the weather. See you all in a couple weeks. Thank you. Thank you, Laura.